This is Green Tide Rising, a podcast following Latin America's Green Wave abortion rights movement,
and how it's unveiling a blueprint for global reproductive freedom.
I'm Monica Morales Garcia.
And I'm Asha Dyer. Last episode, we spoke to the feminist lawyers who made reproductive rights history in Colombia, making abortion free and legal for any reason up to 24 weeks of pregnancy. And for this episode, we're headed to the Caribbean island shared by two countries, the Dominican Republic and Haiti, where some Dominican women are fighting for Las Tres Causales, or the three exceptions, knowing it is not enough.
While we've been able to highlight some of the incredible progress that has been made across Latin America due to the Green Wave, there are countries where the fight is about establishing a foundation that can lay the ground for future progress. Reforming a criminal code and fight for the three exceptions to abortion. And a quick advisory before we begin. Gun violence against children is mentioned in this episode. Please take care while listening.
I was born in the Dominican Republic, in the city of Santo Domingo, into a large family. I am, along with my twin sister, the oldest of 5 siblings.
Cristina Francisco and her twin sister were the oldest of 5. It was the 70s, and she grew up, as she says, humilde, or humble, in the capital of the Dominican Republic.
With my younger brothers and sisters, I played little games, attended school, went to the park, and whatever we could afford, of course, based on our circumstances.
And one night when she was 9, all the neighborhood kids and her siblings were playing outside in front of the house. Children's laughter and games went on for hours. But suddenly, things went quiet. The laughter was gone, and bullets filled the air.
A few police officers were running after some boys who were riding a motorcycle, which was prohibited.
Police shot bullets indiscriminately. They didn't notice that there were children playing in the streets.
They fired many shots. Some of them hit us children who were playing.
The stray bullets made contact with the children. A bullet grazed a neighbor girl's neck. Another was shot in the leg. And Cristina felt the sting of stray bullets in her shoulders.
The shot that affected me the most was the one that went through my shoulder, across my back from shoulder to shoulder.
A bullet went through both of her tiny shoulders, fracturing her spine and instantly leaving her without the ability to move.
At first, and for several years, I had to remain lying down because of my lack of mobility and the serious condition I was left in.
Cristina was bedridden. She wasn't able to leave her bed for 2 years.
It changed my life drastically. I went from being a girl who walked to school with my twin sister every day and also participated in childhood games, running, jumping, and climbing, to being completely limited to lying in bed.
And for a while there, it wasn't just her that was adjusting to her disability.
It was not only my parents, but also my little siblings. I would say it affected the entire family environment because it was something that drastically changed our surroundings, our routines. And for the first time, we all faced, each one of us, what it was like to live with a disability.
Her whole family's life was forever changed by careless police violence. And part of what made the adjusting so hard was the lack of justice or accountability Cristina and her family received.
Why? When the incident happened, since it was police soldiers who did this, they ran, and none wanted to take responsibility. They had all fired shots, but each one claimed that it wasn't them who caused the accident, that it was someone else. And everything was just left like that. The lack of reaction from the justice system also greatly affected my parents.
The lack of accountability from the government is what really got under her parents' skin, especially her father. He couldn't believe the authorities were not going to take responsibility for shooting a 9-year-old girl. His 9-year-old girl. After all, the Dominican Republic has banned all abortions since 1884, based on the, quote, right to life from conception. But whose life is considered valuable or not is entirely subjective. Clearly.
Especially my father, who fell into a state of depression. A depression that, little by little, thankfully, he was able to overcome later.
And after a while, as she was coming to terms with her disability, she began to notice that when people would visit her bedside, they would feel sorry for her.
I remember being treated with a lot of pity, with a welfare mentality, because people would visit me and immediately think, oh, how sad, she's so young. She's going to spend her whole life in a wheelchair. She's going to be lying down all the time. No, she won't be able to get married. And my own mother would say, oh, wow, now she has a disability and she won't be able to have children. She's going to have to live with me forever. All those things were said when people came to visit me. They would say those things to my family, to my little siblings, or to me directly.
She never liked the feeling of people feeling sorry for her. But even worse, everyone, even her own mother, would tell her that because of her disability, she would forever be in a wheelchair, never find love, and never have children. And sure, she'd have to use a wheelchair. But what did that have to do with finding love? Why were they bringing that up? Fortunately, Cristina's twin always tried to keep her spirits high and keep her company.
This allowed me to have the feeling as if I continued going to school, because she became like my companion. And that allowed me to feel as if I hadn't abandoned school.
Back then, not everyone was as kind or accommodating as her sister. And when she finally got healthy enough to leave her bed and be in a wheelchair, she felt so much relief. She was able to leave her bed and be a girl again. But she noticed that not only did people treat her differently now, but getting around in the world was much more difficult.
At that time, the stigma surrounding disability was extremely high. And I realized that the barriers existed not only in my own home, which was a small, non-adapted house, but also in the entire environment, on the sidewalks and in the streets, which did not have the necessary facilities or ramps for mobility.
And so everything was frustrating. She saw all the ways the world was not made for this new version of her, and how being from a family with humble means also made things worse.
Not having a vehicle at home and having to travel daily or every 2 days to a rehabilitation center was also a tough battle. And all of that empowered me to face the reality that my life was going to change and that it was changing from that accident onward.
After the new reality set in that this was going to be her life, no matter what anyone said, she wasn't going to stay in bed all day like people thought. She had big plans for her life. She was in a wheelchair, so what?
I would say, well, I just want to integrate into school. I want to experience things. I want to have friends. I want to do things like any young person my age, like going to the movies, going to a recreational space.
By the time Cristina was a teen, she just wanted to be like all of the other teenagers around her. All of that stuff about not being able to get married or find love, she'd be lying if she said it didn't get to her.
At one point, it did make me doubt whether having a disability would also limit me from having a relationship with a partner, from being able to get pregnant, because I didn't really know all of that. I didn't know if for me that would then be something impossible or something forbidden.
And so crushes on boys, daydreaming about kissing, let alone anything else. She didn't know if those were things that she was allowed to want.
Yo misma me preguntaba, bueno, pero por el hecho de que yo tenga una discapacidad, entonces...
I would ask myself, well, just because I have a disability, does that mean I won't be able to have a child or have a relationship? And then that led me to read, to ask questions, to challenge that reality, and to realize that, okay, just because I have a disability doesn't mean I should deny myself the joy or happiness of being a mother or having a partner, of being able to have a relationship with anyone I felt attracted to and loved.
Y sintiera por mí también alguna atracción y amor también.
But Cristina's mom didn't think that Cristina should be so independent. She had a specific idea of what a person with disabilities could and couldn't do.
Y había sido...
I had been guided by my grandmother, my mother, and they all had that conception of disability. A person with a disability is someone who has to stay at home, lying down or relegated.
Cristina didn't think it was fair that her mother, her grandmother, and her great-grandmother got to dictate her life just because they believed something was or wasn't right for her. She wondered, had they ever considered what she wanted?
Por suerte, todas esas cosas han cambiado.
Fortunately, all those things have changed. They changed, and I was mainly the one who helped change their perception of me. When I showed them and told them, no, but I can have a partner, I can have boyfriends, that it's not something that is really prohibited for me.
Prohibido para mí.
Being able to change her mother's mind, she says, that was part of the reason she founded Círculo de Mujeres con Discapacidad. It's an organization that brings together women with disabilities, and together they promote equality, participation, and leadership of women with disabilities throughout the Dominican Republic.
That they also had the right to decide whether to have a shared life, a partner, and to be or not to be mothers.
And the other reason is that, unlike what everyone said, Cristina actually became a mother and created her own family.
Y ese camino hacia la maternidad.
And this journey towards motherhood also provided me with a perspective that gave me a greater understanding of what sexual and reproductive rights are.
It was all of her experiences together, being told she would never find a partner, that she shouldn't leave her house or go to school or get pregnant, that had a profound impact on her life and outlook. She wanted to decide.
Luego de tener una discapacidad, fue una de las motivaciones que me hizo pensar.
After developing a disability, it was one of the motivations that made me realize that just having a disability was indeed a condition that could and should at some point in life affect every person.
Afectar a cada persona. Pero el tener una discapacidad.
But having a disability really shouldn't mean that you don't have the right to be happy, to have a fulfilling life, to have a family, to receive an education, to share, to have fun, and to live a normal life full of desire. We are truly born to be happy, right?
Como es lo común y como lo deseado. Realmente nacemos para ser felices.
This is Green Tide Rising. Don't go anywhere.
Hi, Asha.
Hey, Monica, and welcome everyone to episode 5 of Green Tide Rising. For this episode, we're in the Caribbean country of the Dominican Republic, where, like El Salvador, there are no exceptions to abortion. Here, a pregnant person can be jailed for 2 years for an abortion or obstetric emergency. Doctors can be charged with over 20 years in prison for providing an abortion. So, as we've heard from Cristina's story, state violence can take on many forms, including forced pregnancy and motherhood. As defined by numerous UN resolutions, forced pregnancy is considered a serious violation of international human rights law, even described as torture in some cases.
So, if you are a person with the capacity to get pregnant and you do become pregnant, eventually you may have to intersect with the lack of sexual and reproductive rights, justice, and care. Yes, we are getting into the intersectional conversation here.
At the end of this episode, we're going to hear from our resident Green Wave expert, feminist lawyer Ximena Casas, who is studying the impact of abortion criminalization across Latin America and the Caribbean. Her research includes the Dominican Republic because of the many intersections we see playing out here. And this is very important to pay attention to when we look at countries where abortion is banned and criminalized.
The criminalization of abortion can affect everyone, but not equally. And that's why having the lens of intersectionality is so important. Discrimination can affect the quality of healthcare received, and marginalized groups might receive lower quality care or face bias from a healthcare provider, which can impact their access to and experience with the reproductive healthcare services.
Cristina was asexualized and demoralized as a woman with a disability. You see, the flip side to the state forcing someone to remain pregnant against their will is the idea that the state can do everything in their power to dissuade some folks, disabled people, from having children altogether. And Cristina's experience of wanting to be a mother and being told that she couldn't, even though she could and did, that transformed her into an activist. So when she decided to have a child, she again saw all the ways that the state was abusing their power and not abiding by the needs of women with disabilities, whether they wanted to have a child or not. Here is Cristina again.
Mujeres con discapacidad, cuando se vean
Women with disabilities, when their lives are at risk due to a non-viable pregnancy, they should be able to decide without this being a contradiction to the law and without their lives being at risk. Because the same barriers that exist to file those reports are there. And there is no access to justice due to structural barriers and the system itself. And it is for all of these reasons that we advocate to be heard for our role in the community in the fight for the three exceptions.
La lucha por las tres causales sea escuchada también por nosotras.
The largest movement for reproductive rights in the Dominican Republic is Las Tres Causales. Círculo de Mujeres con Discapacidad fight for the right to decide as part of their activism and advocate for Las Tres Causales in the Dominican Republic and throughout the Dominican diaspora in the United States. Here is Estefanny Molina. She's the legal director for Latin America at WomenLink. Yeah, that WomenLink that we heard about in the last episode. We'll let Estefanny explain Las Tres Causales.
There are three. The first is where there is a risk to the life of pregnant women. The second is when the pregnancy is a result of sexual violence or incest. And the third is when there is a malformation incompatible with life in utero. And why are they important? Because these exceptions are minimum standards for the protection of the life, health, and integrity of women.
Estefanny at WomenLink is currently working with a client named Rosa Hernandez. Rosa is the mother of Esperancita, a 16-year-old girl who was refused life-saving treatment at a public state hospital because she was pregnant.
And she passed away. The doctors did nothing for her, all due to the complete prohibition of abortion that is still in effect in the country to this day. The three exceptions are minimum standards that the state has the obligation to recognize and guarantee in its legislation, specifically in this case, in the penal code, because it is the only way to ensure that cases like Esperancitas do not happen again in the future.
So for many years, people and organizations like Cristina Francisco at Círculo and Estefanny at WomenLink have been pushing legislators to reform the criminal code and include Las Tres Causales. Back in 2020, during the pandemic, the now president, Luis Abinader, promised the legalization of abortion during his campaign. It was one of the reasons that helped him get elected. But during his first term, no changes were made. Last May, while campaigning for his second term, feminist organizations who expect movement on the Tres Causales increased pressure on the president with protests. Because there's a lot depending on that campaign promise.
Certainly, we need a penal code, but a penal code which meets the needs of the Dominican Republic, not just what is possible. We are in the moment to do what needs to be done. I mean a truly modern penal code that protects fundamental rights and does not violate rights.
Back in June 2024, a deeply problematic bill for a new criminal code made its way through the first approvals in the Dominican Republic Senate. The bill maintained the country's complete ban on abortion, reduced penalties for sexual violence within marriage, and classified it as non-consensual sexual activity. And it continues to exclude sexual orientation from the list of characteristics protected from discrimination, thus failing to afford equal protection to LGBTQ+ people.
So, as the Dominican Senate waits to make its final decision on the problematic bill, activists in the Dominican Republic and throughout the Dominican diaspora in New York are fighting to get the three causales.
My name is Amanda Septimo. I'm the assembly member here in the 84th Assembly District, which includes the South Bronx, most of the South Bronx.
Amanda is a third-generation Dominicana. Her grandparents came to the US in the 60s. She became a state assembly member in 2020 after Amanda beat the incumbent for a seat at the table. She won re-election in 2022, and it's currently looking like she's going to win the seat again come November. Since Amanda got elected, she has become a prominent voice in talking about the Dominican Republic's abortion policies and voting.
Dominicans here in the United States can actually vote in Dominican elections. That's something that gives our diaspora power because we're literally vested in the politics and the happenings of the country. And so you have presidential candidates who come and campaign here, congressional candidates who come and campaign here.
The president of the Dominican Republic, Luis Abinader, and Dominican First Lady Raquel Arbaje joined local dignitaries to kick off the 41st annual National Dominican Day Parade. President Abinader saying in Spanish how proud he feels to be here and expressing his appreciation for Dominicans who live in New York for all their contributions.
Why? Because when you look at voting districts by number, New York is one of the top 3 voting districts in the whole country, even when you look at Dominican Republic, because there are so many Dominicans concentrated here. And so people talk about the Dominican community in DR and the one in New York. They're inextricably linked.
Back in July, after the Dominican Republic's first Senate approval, Amanda and other activists and advocates got together to protest and perform a civil disobedience in front of the Dominican consulate in New York City. Everyone was wearing their green bandanas.
I just want to make clear that every single person here understands the truth. That if a código penal gets signed into law without Tres Causales, it is because Luis Abinader decided that that was okay.
When we sort of conceived of this, really the inspiration was just to raise awareness. We need more people to know. And so that morning, I actually remember thinking, I hope press shows up because, we're going to do the action. A really important part of this was also the rally so that the consulate's office could hear us, so that the Dominican government could hear us and really feel that message, but also so that our people here could hear us and understand that there's a role for all of us to play in this fight. And we have to get off the sidelines because we owe it to our country. We owe it to the women there.
Amanda says that she criticizes the Dominican Republic because she loves the country. It's where she spent her summers and reunited with family. So, the morning of the protests, she gets up, puts on her green blazer and a red lip, and she gets in her car.
And then I drive all the way in to Midtown. And I get there and I actually notice a lot of police.
It looked like there were more policemen than protesters. There were surveillance drones and members of NYPD's Strategic Response Group, a unit known for its violent crackdown on protesters.
So it was nerve-wracking. I think also we're in this moment where protests are happening a lot in New York for a lot of different reasons, and temperature is high. And so it's a little unnerving.
But still, it's about visibility. So Amanda and the other protesters there begin just by holding signs and giving speeches.
You know, anytime you walk in and see that many police and they're there for you, it's a little unnerving. And we were speaking directly in the direction of their office, giving them our message, which is that Dominicans in New York, Dominicans in the diaspora support these 3 exceptions, and we weren't going to let up. We're not going to let up until it gets fixed. And also speaking directly to the president, who, you know, just won his 2nd term to re-election. And in his first campaign run, made a promise to women and girls, said he supported this as the leader of the party that's in charge. Now we're calling on him to meet his promise, to say, this is the moment. You've just won a 2nd term. Now's the time. So we were pushing back against the penal code updating that would continue to criminalize abortion.
So they finished the rally.
And we say, okay, now we're going to lock the doors to the building of the consulate.
Clinging together, Amanda and all of the protesters linked arms in front of the consulate doors.
And there were people that needed to come in and out, and we just did not move. So the building, which is basically like an outpost of an embassy, right? So it's a physical representation of the nation. If you're in their offices, you are technically in the Dominican Republic. And again, there's a ton of police. You're outnumbered. And we held hands and we chanted. And we said, you know, in Spanish over and over and over, Las Tres Causales van is like the phrase. And so we just repeated that over and over and over.
And then there's a loud noise.
They're playing this message that's kind of one of those robotic voices that's like, you are now being told to disperse. And they play that message over and over pretty loud. And they have to play it 3 times. And if you don't move by the 3rd time, they start arresting you. And that's when they start grabbing you. And that's when they start removing you. They grabbed us one by one. And it's that feeling of just like a mix of rage and despair. And so, you know, you get arrested. They put our hands behind our back. They zip tied us. They march us to the van. They take everything out of your pockets for you. They kind of go through that process. They rode us downtown. We got processed. We sat in a cell for some time, and we left with a summons to appear at court a few weeks later. And when we went to court, the judge completely dismissed them.
Amanda was grateful.
Because what usually happens is that you'll have what we call an ACD, which is an adjournment in contemplation of dismissal, which basically means, listen, the judge will just say, keep your nose clean for the next 6 months, and this case will go away. But, you know, that 6 months gets like tricky. You better really not interact with police. But the judge didn't do any of that. She said, you're free to go. And that was moving, and I think speaks to the solidarity that you find in people when they attune to the issue.
Obviously, Amanda understands her position well.
I frankly realized how much privilege I have as a Dominican American woman. It wasn't until I really could appreciate that women in the Dominican Republic are simply fighting to get into this century with us. When I look at it that way, I realize the position of privilege that I have.
Privileges within Latinos are not as complicated as you may think. Arguably, if you understand white supremacy, anti-Blackness, and anti-indigeneity, and how those things impact abortion access, you have a pretty good foundation to what's going on. And every country is a little bit different, sure, but the formula for racism throughout the globe, that's pretty classic. And it almost always has to do with the color of your skin. But what is different about the Dominican Republic is that it shares a border with the first Black republic in America. Colonized by the French, Haiti's independence challenged white supremacist beliefs about Black inferiority and the ability of enslaved Africans to achieve freedom.
The Haitian Revolution was the largest uprising of enslaved people in the Americas, and it scared colonial powers around the world. If it was done in Haiti, it could be done anywhere. So the fact that Haiti is the poorest country in the world today and continues to have violence and health epidemics is not a coincidence. In fact, many think it's on purpose.
We have a really urgent situation, but we never talk about it. Even in the feminist movement, racism is the center of most of the things that are happening here, but we don't talk about it.
This is Catherine de la Cruz Jaime. She works for el Comité de América Latina y el Caribe para el Defensa de los Derechos de las Mujeres, which from now on we'll just refer to as CLADEM. CLADEM are also working with Jimena Casas on her research study, looking at trends and impacts of abortion criminalization across the region, sharing data from the Dominican Republic. And while the focus of this episode is on the sexual and reproductive rights of the DR and the power of the Dominican diaspora, there's no way to talk about the Dominican Republic without talking about the anti-Haitian sentiment woven into what feels like every strand of fabric.
As anti-racists and Black feminists, I think it's really important to highlight the situation in sexual and reproductive rights of Haitian women and Haitian ascendant women. I think they are in a really urgent situation in terms of this situation of abortion, but in terms also their sexual and reproductive rights in general. Because when you don't have a document, you don't have a card to go to the hospital, but also you have all these systematic violence and systems of racism and oppression in the different institutions. It's really hard to be here, to be in the Dominican Republic, to try to have a child, to try to have a safe abortion, to try to go to a doctor to look for any service. I don't know if you have seen the news, how immigration authorities have been taking out of the hospital Haitian women.
With Haiti's shattered healthcare system and its deadly gangs, the Dominican Republic is thought to be a safe haven. But the reality is a crackdown on Haitian migrants.
Being pregnant and are looking for services, they have been taken out, and some even have given birth in front of the hospitals because they have militarized hospitals here, so to avoid Haitian women getting in there.
Catherine's organization, among many others, is raising awareness about this.
The crackdowns on Haitian women and Haitian descendant women in the Dominican Republic is shocking. But this is a new iteration of anti-Haitian sentiment. Back in 2007, the DR passed Resolution Number 12, which essentially determined who is a citizen or who is able to be a citizen of the Dominican Republic. So to this day, every time you perform a civic duty or political act, like getting an ID card, getting married, registering a child for school, or having a baby at a hospital, you need to prove that you are a Dominican citizen. It's been over a decade now, but back in 2013, the Dominican government stripped Haitian immigrants and Dominican children born to undocumented Haitian parents of their nationality.
It cancelled the birth certificates of tens of thousands of Dominican citizens of Haitian descent going back 4 generations. Many children of Haitian immigrants had never even stepped foot in Haiti or spoke the language. But tens of thousands became stateless in a matter of days because of the color of their skin.
That's the point where a lot of things start to happen. Here in the Dominican Republic, the thing is like Las Tres Causales, that is the conversation that we have most public around abortion, is just a tiny part of the problem. States always going to play with rights, a change.
Today, things have not gotten better. In 2022, President Abinader donned a hard hat and helped pour the first concrete for a much-publicized border war with Haiti and has pushed for the deportation of undocumented migrants.
But all that we have is just what we build and how we can find the gaps to try to avoid criminalization, to try to share pills with others, to build something of our own and with our own security, and we are our own gates of escape.
Catherine's words reminded me of the South African poet Jim Jordan, whose poem for South African women at the height of the apartheid was a call to arms about who they can turn to in times of great struggle. "We are the ones we've been waiting for," the poem says. For many Black and brown women throughout history, they've always had to be their own heroes because of the lack of intersectionality.
So if you don't have like this panorama of the different intersections of the situation, you can be missing a lot of women. You can be letting a lot of persons out of the conversation, and you can be thinking like, yeah, I'm saving the planet, I'm saving the women, I'm fighting for women. And that's something that happened a lot with white feminists. So we understand that while the state solve things, we have also give a response. We have to build our own resources, and we have to be in contact with each other. So I think that that's the important part of to be focused on the community, to make sure that women that needs an abortion and want to have an abortion for whatever reasons are safe.
It's a continual struggle, not only for access to daily resources, but a struggle to be recognized by the larger feminist movement.
For Catherine, like Cristina Francisco, it comes down to community organization. They have to create their own system to address their needs because the current institutions are not built to help them.
So it's really hard for me, and it was part of the Tres Causales movement, but I feel like, how can be here like asking for this tiny thing when women in communities want to have an abortion, but also needs another things that are around abortion. But there's a bigger conversation about water, about food, about security, about police repression. So for me, I think we are stuck in the conversation now. So it's important you to stop thinking just around what a state and what a law can give me. It's important, but you also need to build community.
Building collective solidarity among communities is exactly what the Green Wave has done, providing a network of organizations and communities for the fight for bodily autonomy. Because we know that even with the best intentions, without a critical intersectional lens, things can get lost. But that's exactly why communities exist, to guide us, educate us, and raise awareness of our needs.
So let's check in with our friend and feminist lawyer, Jimena Casas, who has some perspective on how grassroots movement building can become a strong foundation to pushing for major social and political change.
Movement building can be incredibly impactful in raising awareness and advancing on abortion rights, such as those pursued by the Las Tres Causales ban movement in the Dominican Republic. In fact, successful efforts to protect and expand reproductive rights in Latin America have relied on the mobilizations from the bottom up to demand judicial rulings and legislative actions that centers women's autonomy and rights, as we have seen in Argentina, in Mexico, and in Colombia. This is what the Green Wave is showing us.
There are some who don't believe campaigning for the 3 exceptions is enough. And we've seen across many U.S. states where there are only 3 exceptions. They still force pregnant people to either endure a non-viable pregnancy or travel out of state despite laws on the books. But in the Dominican Republic, Las Tres Causales, or the 3 exceptions, might have saved Esperancita's life. Jimena, can you give a little bit more context about how pushing for the 3 exceptions can potentially open the doors for future progress?
Establishing exceptions in abortion laws can create this legal precedents that pave the way for a broader reforms. And this could help to open the debate, and the legal exceptions can help reduce the incidence of unsafe abortion and, of course, reducing maternal mortality.
In this episode, we looked at the role intersectionality plays in the fight for reproductive rights. Whether that's someone with a disability like Cristina, or immigrants and Afro-Latina women, as Catherine talked about, it could be easier to say, well, their circumstances don't apply to me specifically. But as the great Audre Lorde quote goes, "I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own.
So having this lens of understanding that race, gender, socioeconomics, migration status also have an intersection on how you can access reproductive health services and how you can access justice and how you can really be able to achieve the complement of your human rights. This is why it's so important to have engaging directly with Afro-descendants and indigenous communities and with other communities that might be in disadvantage to understand their specific needs and that we make sure that we include their voices and incorporate their perspective and leadership into the policy and the advocacy work.
There's so much we can learn from each other in the larger fight for reproductive freedom. And being in community with each other, listening, amplifying, standing in solidarity, and examining our own biases, those can have only positive effects.
As we have seen, the green wave can have different green tones, and everyone has something to contribute. And this means that in a country, the movement might have different strategies and different needs, and that's totally fine. And each approach could contribute to the discussion and help move the debate on the need to recognize reproductive autonomy. We all have a voice and we all have something to say.
This is a good reminder for those of us in the US right now. With no more federal protection for abortion, each state has its own laws, and organizations and leaders understand the different approaches needed. In Latin America, Jimena mentioned that the fact they are even having these conversations, debating between Tres Causales and complete decriminalization, is a step forward that wasn't even possible 10 or 20 years ago.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. It will always be. The road to justice is not linear, but we can't give up. Thank you for listening to this episode. Next week, we head to Brazil, a global superpower, but also a country where abortion is only allowed in 3 exceptions.
Despite this, many women and pregnant people have to cross borders into neighboring countries to get the care they need. But one impending Supreme Court case could change it all.
My perspective on everything that happened changed that afternoon after the procedure. It was no longer a personal issue. Abortion for me was a healthcare matter, and it still is today. But the feeling that I had been very lucky in life led me to begin to question some things.
That's next time on Green Tide Rising. This episode was produced and written by Monica Morales Garcia.
Special thanks to Jimena Casas.
Green Tide Rising is executive produced by Jess Jacobs and Leela Meadow-Connor, with associate producer Adi Biaringer.
And produced in partnership with Pod People.
Our theme music was composed by Andres Aspiri.
I'm your host, Monica Morales Garcia.
And I'm your host and executive producer, Asha Dyer.
Join us again on Green Tide Rising. And in the meantime, head over to our YouTube channel to watch and share our accompanying video series, Entonces. Link in the show notes.
You can also find us on social media and see more about this episode on our website, greentiderising.com. Subscribe and listen wherever you get your podcasts. Bye for now.
Adios.